how has Broadway changed since 1964? I feel Broadway hasn't changed since 1964. In any era, a good show is a good show. It's alive. That performer standing there in front of me is working on my metabolism. And I am responding. And then he senses how I respond and how the whole audience responds. And it's alive, but that goes on all over the world. In regional theater, in any theater, it doesn't matter to me where the theater is as long as it's live. At least that's what I like best, being live. See, there are anodes and cathodes between people and with a whole audience. When you send out the anodes and they send back the cathodes, it's electricity. That's what you have when you put a plug in the wall. It's electricity. And it's really electricity. It's not just like it. It is what happens between people. It's a magnet. I was very lucky. Somebody nominated me for secretary of the student body in the 4th grade. I was 7 years old. And the procedure was you were to get up on the school auditorium stage from the audience and tell your fellow students why they should vote for you. Well, naturally, I couldn't think of one reason. But I was an only child, and many only children tell me they do this. They talk to wonderful people they imagine, and people that they met that day, and people who were funny or eccentric or adorable or kissable or sexy or something, but they smack of something that you can't forget. So you turn into them and you do them as an only child. So you have tea parties and you have a cup of tea here for the principal of the school, because she was fascinating, Miss Berard, and you have a cup of tea for yourself, and you sit there and you talk to Miss Berard. Then you get over to the other side. You have nobody to talk to. You're an only child. So, and my mother's friends used to say, who's Carol talking to? She said, oh, pay no attention. She's all alone. Pay no attention. They say, she's not all alone. Well, I thought, I don't know what to do, but so all of a sudden I thought, I'll do the only thing I know how to do. So I turned into Miss Berard, the principal of the school. And Commodore Sloat Grammar School, it's still there. So I said, go to the polls and vote for Carol. She was apparently the Julia Childs, the forerunner of Julia Childs, you see. And I used to be fascinated. Is that adenoids? I don't know what it is, but it was her own voice. And she spoke that way. And they recognized Miss Berard and they laughed. And then I did Mr. Schwartz, the chemistry teacher who blew up the chemistry class on an average of once a term. And they all recognized Mr. Schwartz, and he loved it. Mr. Schwartz, they all did. And I did Miss Weaver, the social studies teacher, who came from the Bronx, and I did anybody, whoever they might know. I did Marjorie Gould, the cutest girl in school, and switched my little fanny around and all. And they all knew, and they laughed, and I thought, what I laugh at, that's what everybody else laughs at. All my fellow students feel the same way. What I go toward, that's what we all go toward. Suddenly, in the middle of that stage, I was no longer an only child. We're all alike. We go toward the same things, away from the same things. We're all exactly alike when it comes to crying or laughing or any of the normal emotions. And I ran off the stage and I thought, oh God, I hid behind the coats in the cloakroom and cried and thought I will do anything to get back on that stage again. Well, thank God I was elected secretary because, there was no choice. It was holy mayhem. So I waited till my father got home from the office that night. He was my confidant. And I said, Daddy, a tremendous thing happened to me today. I was soaring. The knowledge that we're all together here, the safest place in the world is the middle of the stage. And I told him all about it. And that's when he listened to the whole thing and he said, there's an adage that says, be careful what you set your heart upon, for you shall surely get it. So I said, you mean to say I can lay down my life right now? And he said, you can lay down your life at 7, as you are now, or you can lay it down at 97. It doesn't matter. But these are the people that are happier. Al Hirschfeld was always the great chronicler of Broadway theater. Now, he since has branched out into movies and lots of other things, but the chronicler of actors, really, of faces that you recognize. And it's funny and it's accurate. Oh, and it's a commentary. Well, as the years go on, I'm convinced Al Hirschfeld will be like Toulouse-Lautrec. We only know Jane Avril because Toulouse-Lautrec did a poster of her. You know, we only know La Goulou because Lautrec did it. Well, anyway, so we'll all go down in history, I hope, because of Al Hirschfeld. The thing is, he came to a little review called Lendinier. I was one of 20 unknowns in this little review. Al came, saw it. I didn't know he was there. On the Sunday New York Times front page of the theater section, he did a drawing of me as the Gladiola. It was a sketch. It was a review. One of the sketches was the Gladiola Girl, and we satirized the 20s. We were the first to ever think of satirizing the 20s. And after that, there was a big wave of it. Well, we satirized the 20s. And Al did this drawing of me in what it is the Lost Road Company. They've been lost now for 10 years on the road. But just tonight they turned up, and we're so happy. Well, the chorus was Sulu, Prue, and Boo. I was Prudence. I was over 6 feet tall in heels. The other girls came up to my shoulder or below. They were cute looking. Well, they were tough chorus girls, but I was the littlest and the cutest and the most adorable of any of them, and I thought I was. What I decided in my mind was during those 10 years I had grown up and didn't realize I was over 6 feet tall. So there I was, and we were all with our knees together, and we had close hats on. Al drew a close hat on me, and he put 2 buttons on the end of the brim. The bottom of the brim, and they just looked like 2 black buttons sewn to the brim of the closed hat. And I had a veil with just the eyes out. And it was a dress that was, and then around the hips. I thought, who is that? It looks just like my father in a closed hat. You know, I didn't know who, at that age you don't know what you look like. But I knew the character. How does he know what we're thinking? I was thinking little bitty. I was thinking feminine, frail, kissable. I was thinking all these wonderful things, and he knew just what I was thinking. This man has a divining rod. Well, it landed on the front page of the New York Times, and Anita Loos, Julie Stein, Oliver Smith, Herman Levin, everybody who were producing Gentlemen Prefer Blondes came and said, Anita said, there's my Lorelei Lee for Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. She wrote it. She's the great writer. It's a classic now. Many people feel it's the great American novel. It was the funniest girl that was written. It was her diary. Julie Stein, she came back with Julie Stein, and he looked at the whole thing and said, went home and wrote my Battle Hymn of the Republic, Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend. Just from seeing it, that character, she said, that's my character, Lorelei Lee. Well, the next thing I knew, but Al Hirschfeld did that for me. Everybody came to see it. Suddenly the box office went up. They thought, well, who's that? We better go see it if Al Hirschfeld thinks that much of it. So they did. Wasn't I fortunate? I mean, imagine the great Hirschfeld. And I still don't see where it looks like me, but it does look like my father.
Great.
I'll tell you what it's like. It's like being in love. And if you really love, and it's true love, it'll last over a lifetime like a marriage. If it isn't true love, and it'll drag you through the most terrible things. I mean, you can get terrible diseases and viruses and everything else, and for some strange reason, no matter what you get, at the end of the show, I feel either better or cured. And I don't care what it is. It can even be cancer. I don't care what it is. But doing that show does that. It's being in love. If somebody truly loves you and you truly love them back again, It's a cure. It's the life force. To ask how do you keep from getting bored with it is the most dangerous work in the world. All you have to do is have your mind waver that much. And they didn't hear that line. Suddenly there's no laugh on that line or no tears on that line. I remember once thinking, gee, I'm hungry. What'll I have for dinner? As quickly as that, they didn't hear the line. The audience doesn't hear what you don't recreate every single show 8 times a week. Well, that's disaster. If you lose your audience, you see, the natural thing is to lose an audience. That's just automatic. That's natural. You can lose an audience much easier than hold the magic or hold them. And you have to, but every single performer on the stage is walking a tightrope, or else he's not hired for another show. So everybody you see, I just saw Frank Langella in Present Laughter. I just saw Whoopi Goldberg. I just saw the most wonderful. I've been seeing Broadway shows. That's magic. They can't. Do you know what kind of concentration that takes? Wow. It's like Al Hirschfeld when he draws a thing. They got 3 shots of Al Hirschfeld drawing a subject. The concentration in his eyes was a lesson in acting. There's a blessing on your head, especially if you're in love with the character. And I've been fortunate. I never had to play any character I wasn't madly in love with. And how do you go about it? First of all, you have to be in love with the character, as I say, which proves to me, you see, if you do a character you don't love dearly, nobody recognizes it. Isn't that interesting? But if you do somebody that you're crazy about, that you just can't live without your comment on them, without turning into them, you want to be them, like I wanted to be Ethel Waters. You want to be that person. Then it's very accurate. People recognize her, which makes me realize there is no creation without loving it. You've got to love it an awful lot until you've got to paint the picture of it or do the music about it or whatever art form it takes. There is no creation without love. Nobody knows who it is otherwise. You wouldn't know that was Van Gogh's cypress tree if he didn't adore it. You'd just say, I wonder what that is, if he painted something he didn't love. So we all had to be created with love, and no holes barred. I mean, we had to be, there's a force that created us, or we wouldn't get created. And that's what you find out in the creative arts. It doesn't get done if you don't adore it. Isn't that wonderful? Some force just thought we were the cutest things that ever happened.
How you first connected with Jerry Herman on Hello, Dolly.
Oh, the moment I met him, he had a little apartment that he kept himself. It was one room on West 9th Street, just off 5th Avenue, that first block. It looked like a monastery. It was all white stucco walls and brown shutters, a brown piano, a brown counterpane on the bed, and that was it. It had a kitchen sink, and that was it. And I thought I said, why does it seem as if this is where the monks saved the Bible or something, you know? This is where in the Renaissance, when the bubonic plague came along, this is where a few men got together and said, let's save civilization with as much as we can. That's what it looked like. Good work was done there. This place was a workplace, a monastery, a cathedral to Jerry's talent almost, but it was just one room, a bedroom, and a kitchen sink in between. And there he was, that little man, and I walked in and I looked and I thought, there's the monk. He's the one keeping keeping the flame, you know, of civilization, of great, great work being done. And he said, I already had the part. Gower Champion gave it to me in Hello Dolly. Mr. Merrick gave it to me, too. Mr. Merrick said, that's it. I'm going to have a show written for you, and that's it. Gower, Mr. Merrick said, Gower, I have this show written for Carol Channing. He was busy working on Rodgers and Hammerstein and said, you have to turn it down. It's, I'm working with it. Suddenly, Rodgers and Hammerstein did not do that show, and he was free. And he said, okay, I can now direct Hello Dolly and choreograph it. So he said, there's only one thing. I don't want Carol Channing. Now, I'd already done Lendinier for him. He said, I just don't want her. Why is a long explanation. Oliver Smith caused that. But anyway, he's gone now, so we don't have to go into that. But just the same, Gower said, I don't want her. So then they offered it to Ethel Merman. Ethel loved saying, yeah, I know that show. I'd turn that down. Which, God, I think she's the funniest woman ever. She didn't even know how funny she was. I adored her. I was with her on her deathbed. But anyway, Gower had already, I said, Gower, look, when I feel this way about a character, let me audition for you. I want to. He said, well, that's demeaning to audition. I said, no. I want you to see me, what I think of Dolly Gallagher Levi. This is who I think she is. So I took the original matchmaker that Thornton Wilder wrote. I did the money speech for him. I did the famous speeches that have gone on about what is marriage, what is love, all that. And I did those for God. We went through the book. I stood up on the stage and did it for him again, another audition, and he just stood there and watched. And at the end of the whole thing, it went on for 3/4 of an hour. He said, I buy that. And Gower and I never wavered. We were like a ship in a storm with a rudder. The two of us were together. Every show goes through that. If you don't go through that terrible storm period when everybody says, why did we ever get into this thing? Somehow you never seem to have a hit, oddly enough. Every piece of creative work has to go through a time when, why did I ever start this terrible idea? And then slowly you rally your forces together and make it work. You know, it's got to go through that terrible stage. So we went through it, but Gower and I never. He bought what he saw at that audition. The ship almost capsized. We stayed together. He never questioned me. I never questioned him. I did blindly what he told me to do. The man had a peculiar talent. He knew how to frame what I thought of Dolly. He said, I'm not a great choreographer. I'm not a great dancer. I'm not a great playwright. I'm not a great director. I'm a showman. And that's what he was, the finest, most aristocratic form of a showman. Truly a great artist. As I've said often, I felt like the statue of the thinker, and Gower was Rodin. And he would go back to the back of the theater, and he worked for 2 weeks, the first 2 weeks of rehearsal on the Hello Dolly number. He said, I got to get the level of this show. And if I were Josh Logan, or if I were Robert Moore, I would, or Elia Kazan, we'd be on the script first. But he said, I'm not. I see everything as it's danced and sung. And so did I. But I did obediently what he wanted me to do. And he would say, pick Dolly up in this. Hello Dolly was supposed to be an intimate musical, a small musical with only 14 people. By the time the 2 weeks was over, he said, get me more waiters, get me a bigger stairway. No, get me more Dolly boys, get me more cooks. Now I want 12 cooks singing Hello Dolly at the top of their lungs. And he said it got bigger and bigger, and suddenly he knew the level of this show. And he said, he watched, for 2 weeks, we watched Gower come down to the orchestra pit and say, all right, pick Dolly up and do this, do that with her, and I'll run back and look. And he ran back and he looked and he said, put her down, that isn't right. Dolly's feet are never off the ground. Her feet are firmly planted right there on the ground, and she runs everybody else around. That's her character. He set that character off. I trusted him with my soul. But if you can sing a character and dance a character rather than walk and talk the character, Gower and I felt you suddenly get in that rare realm, which is her soul. You've got her soul instead of just the way she walks and she talks. You haven't got that then. But you've got it if you sing her and dance her. All of a sudden, she does a tour jeté like only Dolly Gallagher Levi does it. And she does a wind-up and a bump and lets them have it, And she is the biggest little Hadassah from the Battery to the Bronx because she was in love with her husband, Ephraim Levi. Her name was Gallagher, her maiden name. But she was in love with him, and she turned into his ancestors, and Gower and I dreamed her and loved her and caressed her. And it was the greatest experience to work with Gower. He forgot all about any differences of opinion that we had in Lendonier. I forgot about them. We just adored each other. And he never said so. He never said so. But we got this darn thing on, and he yelled across the stage that night. I said, I can't go out. I can't face the newspapers, the reviews on opening night. I can't. And they still had the intercoms on and the microphone for the show on opening night. And I waited there miserable. Richard L. Coe, the critic emeritus for the Washington Post, was sitting with me. And my beloved Anita Luce, my spiritual mother, sat with me in the dressing room. I had one on each side, giving me strength. And I said, I can't face it. I can't go into Sardi's and listen to those reviews. We've dreamed about this woman and loved her so. If somebody says, I don't get it, that's it. I can't take it. So I held on to both of them, and Gower, I heard his voice come through the intercom, and he said, Carol, we're a smash hit. Oh, my God. He finally got into the dressing room, but the intercom was still on, and he didn't know it, and he couldn't stop yelling. Oh, and my dear Anita Luce was sitting right next to me, and she was so happy for me, and so, oh, dear, you don't know what it is. You just don't know to have a hit like that.